to talk some wrestling with the Pro Wrestling Diagnosis. Once again, to reiterate, this is called the Diagnosis because I am trying to diagnose and help why I think wrestling has been dying for the past decade. And it's because just it all blends together with this wrestling for me as of late. But last week was fun. I had fun talking about this, and I talked about the Aew Revolution Pay-per-View, and it took place last Sunday. So we might as well start with that pay-per-view and start with AEW. Now, I'm probably not going to dwell on the buy-in much. I don't feel like too much important things came out of that. Leyla Hirsch defeated Statlander. We also had Don Callis appear. Callis basically trolled the fans, came out to Kenny Omega's theme, and talked about how the fans basically have burnt out Kenny Omega. They just drained the blood out of him, always wanted him to put on 5-star matches. Don Callis is always a good heel promo. And it was also good, to keep Kenny Omega relevant, I guess, even though this was just on the buy-in. We then had Hook. He defeated QT Marshall. They've been pushing Hook. I just can't get over the fact that Hook is like 100 pounds. It is hard for me to suspend disbelief with Hook. I get they're trying to make him like Taz, but Taz actually looked the part. You didn't know what to make of Taz. Hook just looks like a fucking high school kid, bro. And then House of Black defeated Penta and Redbeard and Pac. But let's get to the actual pay-per-view. Jericho and Eddie Kingston started the pay-per-view, and it was actually one of my favorite matches of the pay-per-view. And overall, I feel like Revolution was an okay pay-per-view. It was not as good as it was hyped up to be afterwards from the usual AEW fanboys. I feel like it's just very popular to say AEW puts on great shows all the time. The build to the pay-per-view was honestly okay, though. I enjoyed the build more than I enjoyed the actual pay-per-view itself. But I think the pay-per-view was okay. It all kind of became a lot, though. Like, every match just turned into a mess, it felt like. It all became violent and bloody. Like, if you're going to do blood spots, I don't understand why you do that in every match. Because then it just takes away from the matches. I don't know. I feel like I explained this, but I don't. Wrestling has devolved. Everyone wants to say it evolved, but it devolved on a basic psychology basis. But anyway, back to the Jericho and Eddie Kingston match. I like that this told the story that Kingston finally won the big one. It's the exact direction this match needed to go in. Eddie Kingston to beat Jericho. And that's the story the match told. I have to say that the stretch plum is just not one of my favorite moves at all. It looks so weak half the time it gets put on by Kingston. I don't know. He could maybe do better with that. But I'm glad Kingston won. It's what the story needed. It's what Kingston needed. The story also followed up with this because Jericho said he would shake Kingston's hand if Kingston beat him, and then he doesn't. But we'll talk about that when we get to Dynamite. We then had the tag title match, Jurassic Express versus the Bucks versus Red Dragon. And look, anytime I've talked about the Bucks on this channel, I talk about how I just do not jive with their style. It is not my cup of tea whatsoever. It's just a giant spot fest where nothing matters. So this was by far my least favorite match of the night. Anytime the Bucks are on, it's my least favorite part of the show, and will probably always be. The Bucks bring nothing to the table except poorly contrived high spots. I think Jurassic Express retaining the tag titles was the right call. I think they've pushed this tag team good enough, and I think them keeping the titles was the right call, however. But the match itself, not my cup of tea whatsoever. We then had the ladder match. Wardlow, of course, won. This was another very big spot fest. I mean, I enjoyed it more than the Bucks match, at least. So it was entertaining. Wardlow winning, it was pretty obvious they were going this way with Wardlow. I will also talk more about Wardlow here in a while when I talk about Dynamite. Wardlow's getting a big mid-card push, it feels like. But I'm not sold yet. We had Swerve, Shane Strickland debut. A good signing for AEW. I mean, AEW just constantly signs people and debuts people. To say that AEW's roster is bloated is an extremely gigantic understatement. They just constantly assign people, and there's just not enough time to put effort into everybody's character, story, even matches for that matter. Even though the wrestling wants to focus on matches these days. But that's part of the reason all the matches blend together, because it's just a lot of high spots one after another. But I like Swerve a lot. I used to like him in NXT. So we'll see what they do with him. It's a good signing, but AEW does this a lot. We'll have more in this podcast to talk about. The TBS title, Jade Cargill retains. I talked about how this was the right direction for this title. The match itself against Ty Conte wasn't that good. Still better than the Bucks match, though. But they did what needed to be done here with Jade retaining. Now, the dog collar match between CM Punk and MJF, where CM Punk once again gets bloody. I just feel like Punk getting bloody on Dynamite and then Punk getting bloody again here just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, this was a dog collar match, so maybe it needed all the extreme that it could get. But the match went on hella long. This was a hella long match that it kind of started dragging eventually. I did like how CM Punk came out to his ROH theme and his ROH attire. That was a nice touch after coming off of the fact that Tony Khan bought ROH, but also that, you know, the storyline's basically turning CM Punk into a monster. That's what they were going for with this. But I do think this match at least told a story with Punk having to go back to his roots to be a monster. Punk needs all I could get right now, because the booking for Punk has been so weak, and this needs a strong follow-up. Punk needs such a strong follow-up, because I truly think Punk's booking in AEW has been bad for him. He's just losing it. And the crowd didn't even care that he came out to the ROH theme and his ROH attire. I think half the crowd was confused. So I don't know if that speaks well of Tony Khan buying ROH. But the match itself was good, but it was too long. I mean, for a dog collar match, it was good. But as a regular, like, comparing it to regular matches, it wasn't that great. It dragged on way too long. They did tell the story also with Wardlow, though, that he comes out to give MJF the ring to help him win. He can't find it. Punk takes advantage of that with the go to sleep. Then Wardlow finds the ring, because he knew where it was the whole time, puts it on the side of the apron, and Punk uses it to get the win over MJF. So I like the booking for the ending of this match. It adds in Wardlow. But Punk needs such a strong follow-up. We then had the women's title, and Britt Baker defeats Thunder Rosa after a lot of interference. I said on the preview, I really think Thunder Rosa needs to just win the title. I still think it could be coming, but this match wasn't that good. This is probably my second least favorite match of the night, because it was just a lot of interference. I mean, I guess it still continues to build Britt Baker up as a heel with all of that, but it was the right time to change the titles. This title reign has not worked, and this match didn't work either. Next up was Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley. This was probably the best match of the night for me, even though the ending wasn't what I would have done. I already talked about how Bryan Danielson needs to be pushed to be the AEW champion by the end of this year. But Moxley did get the win with this kind of roll-up. But I think the match worked. It had the right amount of violence compared to a lot of the other matches in the night. It had some good technical wrestling. But the best part, I guess, of this was after the match where where Bryan Danielson is upset and continues to fight Moxley. And then out comes William Regal, who has to break them up. He slaps them both to try and get them to see that now they can work together as a tag team. William Regal, a great addition because he has been a mentor for both Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley. William Regal, a great backstage mentor, so hopefully more wrestlers on AEW's roster will talk to Regal and listen to Regal. Because I think he's another person that has played a part in making Bryan Danielson one of the must-watch wrestlers in modern wrestling. So while I don't quite like Bryan Danielson losing, maybe Moxley didn't need a win, but we'll see what comes of this story as a tag team. I also don't actually know how I feel about them becoming a tag team, because I just think both guys will do better as singles wrestlers and bring more to AEW as singles wrestlers. But the story with William Regal is there, at least. Next up, Darby Allin, Sting, and Sammy Guevara defeated Matt Hardy, Andrade, and Isaiah. This was another match that was kind of like a hardcore match. It just went all over. We had a splash onto some tables from Sting. Sting, who was over 6 years old, probably shouldn't be doing that. But I mean, I guess it was a cool spot for Sting. Sting just still tries to go at his old age. On one hand, I kind of respect it. On another, it's kind of a lot. And then last was the main event, Adam Page and Adam Cole. I mean, I've already talked about how I feel about Hangman's title reign. Hangman needed this win, but Hangman just continues to get overshadowed by the rest of the card. Some will say this match did well as a main event and really held its ground against the rest of the card, but I think those are AEW fanboys saying that, and it's just bias. The match was okay, but the title reign continues to limp along, and when I talk about Dynamite here, I think I'm seeing a trend with Tony Khan's booking. Look, there's a lot that works, and I'm glad. I think he's actually getting better as a booker. So I will give him credit on that. But I do think there is a bad thing that I will talk about. And I'll talk about the rest of Dynamite. But I want to talk about Wardlow first before I forget this point that I want to make, to try and diagnose a possible problem with AEW. We see with Hangman Adam Page, and I talked about this last week, how the story... Look, Tony Khan saw the story to the end. They built up Hangman Page to be the man that defeats Kenny Omega after Omega looked unstoppable for a while and held a bunch of titles, including the Impact Wrestling title. But since Hangman has won the title, we see all of his weaknesses, and the booking hasn't helped him either, because putting him with Dark Order just is bad. But he's not that great on the mic, and he's just not that interesting as a character. So we see that he gets overshadowed by the rest of the roster. And now I feel like this has a possibility of happening with Wardlow. And Wardlow has some support from the fans, but so does Hangman Page. But I think it could end up being too soon for Wardlow, depending on how far they go with him. Because he too, in my opinion, is rather basic on the mic, and is a rather basic character who's just kind of a strong dude. So my fear is that if Tony Khan just wants to see another story to the end, and that this one being Wardlow, that it could have the same results as Hangman Adam Page if Wardlow is pushed to be bigger than he actually is too soon. Then he too, getting this push to possibly have a future shot at the TNT title, would kind of backfire. Like, I do feel like it has backfired with Hangman Adam Page. So I think the point I'm trying to make here with Tony Khan's booking is that I think that he can be maybe too pig-headed, stubborn when it comes to his storytelling, just to see stories through. On one hand, it's respectable, but I think on an actual creative level, to know when you might have to pivot is a very strong tool to need when it comes to creative writing, storytelling, all of that. Like, I talk about soap operas a lot on this channel, and the soap operas that write so long in advance that it's hard for them to pivot, and then if they write a bunch of bad stories, then the show overall, of course, is going to suffer. Whereas, there's some soap operas that don't write as long ahead, and they can pivot and listen to the fans more so to really get that idea. But I think Tony Khan is one of those people that thinks he could do no wrong, and he surrounds himself by yes men, and he pays off people like Dave Meltzer to kiss his ass at all times and overrate all of his star matches. It could be a bad thing. So I just hope Tony Khan could eventually pivot better on his stories. And this might not be as bad, because I don't know if Wardlow being pushed to win TNT title is that big of a deal, honestly. But I do think his push otherwise is too soon, even though so far I think it's working, and I don't think it's bad. I think it's been good. I like that it's been tied to the Punk and MJF feud. But he's not that interesting. Anyway, let's get to the start of Dynamite, which had Kingston explaining to Jericho that he didn't need Jericho's handshake, so he doesn't care that Jericho didn't shake his hand. Kingston agreed he needed this match and he needed this win, but he didn't need Jericho's handshake. He thinks that Jericho needed to shake Kingston's hand after the match for whatever reason. And this is where we get an attack by 2.0 and Garcia out there attacking Jericho and Kingston. Ortiz and Santana make the save, and then Jericho hits Santana and Ortiz with the bat. Jake Hager also comes out to beat up some of his ex-teammates. And so we have a new stable for Jericho, which I believe he called it Jericho Appreciation Society. So it gives Jericho something new to do. It gets him to work as a heel more so again. And let me talk about Jericho real quick, because I don't know if I've ever really explained this on the channel. I've talked about some wrestling in the past, talked about old wrestling with Fan Guy, but look, Jericho is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. But in recent years, he's gotten on my nerves because he's a hypocrite who became the wrestler he used to hate that hung on too long in WCW. And it made me lose a lot of respect for him, I'm not going to lie, because he was this chubby alcoholic who came out looking bad for the past 2 years and needing a lot of the spotlight. So it was very much like Hogan, Hall, and Nash, who he used to hate on in WCW, even though Hall and Nash weren't that old at the time. But Hogan, obviously, is Hogan. But in recent months, Jericho looks good, so I will give him credit for that he has gotten himself in better shape, hopefully taking better care of himself when it comes to alcohol and partying, because the man is old, and he needs to do that. But props to Jericho for looking way better in recent months. Hangman Page had a match. He defeated Dante Martin. Adam Cole challenged Hangman Page to a six-man tag. I mean, I hate six-man tags. I hate multiple-man tag matches, so that does nothing for me. And it certainly does nothing for Hangman Page's title run. Moxley and Bryan Danielson teamed up together. William Regal cut a promo about them and how they're going to kick everybody's asses as a tag team. I still don't know how I feel about them just being a tag team right now. But we'll see where it goes. I'm giving it a chance because I like the William Regal side of the story. I just don't know if this is going to get the best out of these two guys for AEW. We then had an interesting angle where Andrade got Matt Hardy's very own stable to turn against him and outvote him out of the stable and then beat him up. Stig and Darby Allin tried to make the save, but that didn't work out either. And then we have the debuting Jeff Hardy to really make the save and save his brother. So we have another debut from AEW, this time Jeff Hardy, another ex-WWE guy. But yeah, I mean, the Hardy Boys back together in AEW it's a good thing. They even bought the Hardy Boys' old theme song because Tony Khan will spend that money at all costs, being the son of a billionaire. I do think we have to talk about the fact that AEW is kind of becoming a one-trick pony where it's just all about announcement and debuts to gain interest, and then the ratings just fall the next week because this gets redundant. It is a one-trick pony type of deal. But I do still think there's enough creatively going on by Tony Khan in some of these stories where he can work with it for now, but you just can't deny that this roster is bloated. And I get that there's YouTube shows that they're just matches, though. They don't do nothing for anybody, honestly. I mean, if they could tune up some younger people, so I mean, that's cool. But just having Dynamite and Rampage, that's only 2 shows a week for all of this roster, and then only having a pay-per-view 4 times a year, it's just, there's not enough time for everybody, and it's going to become a major issue. I already feel like it is a major issue with CM Punk, because I think the booking for Punk just hasn't been good. And we didn't get a follow-up on Punk from the pay-per-view, so I don't know what is the next direction for Punk, but I think the follow-up needs to be strong, because between last week in Dynamite and the start of the match at the pay-per-view, Punk didn't even get a good ovation. So I think that's problematic. This was supposed to be the guy that really changed AEW and put him on the map. And as you can see, the booking has not been good for him because that has faltered a lot. Also on Dynamite, we had a winner gets a shot at the women's title match between Leyla Hirsch and Thunder Rosa. I mean, I kind of like that Leyla Hirsch was in this match. It makes her win over Statlander at the buy-in at the pay-per-view mean something. But Thunder Rosa wins, so I guess she'll get a rematch. And maybe this will finally be the time she wins the title. I don't know what they're doing with the women's title. They just continue to struggle with the women's title and the women's division in general. And then we end the show with the TNT title. And Sammy Guevara loses the TNT title to a Scorpio Sky that has been on a winning streak for the past year. And one thing I haven't touched upon yet is Tony Khan's tone-deaf tweet when it came to Big Swole, when he basically attacked Big Swole on Twitter and kind of basically said she sucked as a wrestler. And then he got a lot of pushback for attacking a black woman wrestler who only gave an interview about the company struggling when it came to their black wrestlers. And so, I mean, I feel like Tony Khan has had to change up when it comes to the black wrestlers on his roster. But I mean, I do think they kind of sort of built up Scorpio Sky. Okay, I mean, they gave him a winning streak. But it still doesn't feel like they did a good story here to me. And I don't even know how I feel about it. But I mean, I will give it a chance. We'll see where Scorpio Sky goes as the TNT title. I still don't know why they have 2 titles for the TNT title. I get that there was an interim match because Cody Rhodes allegedly left the company. But why they keep the 2 titles around, I don't understand, unless it does lead to, down the line, Cody Rhodes coming back. Because there's no other reason to keep 2 TNT titles, unless it's going to go somewhere. Like, this isn't the UFC. You don't need an interim title. And now the title changes again to Scorpio Sky, so he's going to just carry around the 2 titles too? It's a bit ridiculous. One last note about Sammy Guevara and his girlfriend, Ty Conti. These two get a lot of flack on social media, and they deserve all the flack that they get. You know, not even to mention the fact that we saw Sammy Guevara propose to Pam on AEW, and then suddenly they break up, and then he's with Ty Conti. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on that, because allegedly Pam and Sammy are still friends, so I don't think Sammy cheated on her with Ty, even though they dated soon after that. But those two on social media are always talking about their relationship. They're clearly in the honeymoon phase, and that's great and all. And I don't care that they are doing that. But what annoys me, and this is the thing that annoys me on social media a lot, is when they are doing all this attention-seeking posts about each other all the time, and then they get mad when they get too much comments about it. And then they get mad at all the attention it gets, but it's clearly attention-seeking in the first place, so it doesn't even make any sense. I just hate when people are attention-seeking on social media, and then when they get that attention, and a lot of it's negative, they're like, leave us alone, even though they brought it on themselves. I think, Sammy still has a lot of growing up to do, honestly. And probably Ty Conti as well. But let's move on to the WWE. Not a whole lot to talk about because this past week of TV from WWE was all bad. The road to WrestleMania is not paved well. It is like a muddy mess and all around just not good. We had a pretty big tag team match on Raw, and it was the Champions Alpha Academy versus RK Bro versus Rollins and Owens. The whole storyline kind of being who's going to win the tag titles and go to WrestleMania to defend them. Now, this match was pretty great at times. I think by far the best part of it, anybody that didn't watch this match should go watch. I talk a little shit about high spots, but this one was pulled off very well, where there was basically a moonsault off the top rope into an RKO from Randy Orton. Randy hitting that RKO as the moonsault is going down. It was seamless, and that made the match for me. So, Raw started pretty hot, but from there, not a whole lot went down. RK Bro, by the way, did win those tag titles to go to WrestleMania as tag champions, I guess. Another highlight, I guess, was the Miz promo in Cleveland. Miz is from Cleveland, and Logan Paul also grew up in Cleveland, and so they had this whole promo cutting. I gave Miz all the credit last week for his promos, and I'm going to do it again. Miz on promos, he's an over-the-top character, but he never misses on the mic, or at least rarely misses in promos. He stays in character, he's entertaining, and this promo was basically, it went on too long, which hurt it because Lawler came out and there was this whole thing. But it basically went how Miz was hyping up Cleveland, and by the end he was shitting all over Cleveland. It was, it's cheap heat for sure, but it was entertaining, and Miz did a good job, as usual, cutting promos. We had a Finn Balor, Austin Theory match. That was kind of a DQ from Damian Priest. And then we had the whole Kevin Owens wants Stone Cold Steve Austin to be on the KO show at WrestleMania. So they're still teasing a possible match between Kevin Owens and Stone Cold Steve Austin. It's been an odd thing. I don't know if it will be a real match or it will just be a quick stunner from Steve Austin, because, this hasn't been built up as some epic return of Steve Austin to the ring. So I kind of don't think it's going to be some epic match, Kevin Owens versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. It'll probably just be something into a stunner. And yeah, that basically summed up Raw. A whole lot of nothing. Rough shit over there. SmackDown might have been even worse, and we'll get to the injury here in a second. SmackDown started when Reigns... Well, we got the highlights from Madison Square Garden show, a house show from the WWE last weekend, where Roman Reigns left Lesnar bloody in the ring, so Lesnar was pissed off on SmackDown, and Reigns wasn't on SmackDown, so Lesnar chases Heyman. It was lame. All of WrestleMania's build has been mostly lame. Like, even this title match between Reigns and Lesnar, I just feel like we've seen it before, and they've been building it like since the beginning of the year or longer, and it's just kind of dragging at this point. It's like, I talk about soap operas on this channel, and a lot of them just drag too hard. This storyline, if you even want to call it a storyline, is also dragging. Another note I have is just how
awful Ronda Rousey is on the microphone. Her promos just sound like she's reading them boringly from a script, I guess, which is probably what she's doing. But it comes off terrible. She's boring on the mic. She's just reading lines. And look, it's not as awkward as Tony Khan on the microphone. He's still the worst I've seen the past 2 years. But Ronda's up there as one of the worst on the mic. And her build with Charlotte just has no real flair, if you will. It has no heat. I think it's been a boring, bad build. And the Raw Women's title has the better build because it's been building since SummerSlam. Yeah. And then last note before I get to the bad, sad injury is Austin Theory slapped Pat McAfee again, and they had a brawl outside the ring. So Pat finally got to get a little physical with Austin Theory before their match at WrestleMania. Honestly, that match this past week might have been the only match on WrestleMania's card with some decent build. But let's get to the sad, bad injury on Big E. Big E, they finally gave him a title this past year. It should have been a better title run than it was, but what do you expect from the WWE? And now Big E breaks his neck in a match where Ridge Holland tries to suplex Big E, drops him right on his head. Right on his head. And, I see people online being like, don't blame Ridge Holland. I'm sure he feels bad enough. He should feel bad. His form on suplexes is god-awful. And he did this not long ago where he almost broke Gargano's neck. He dropped Gargano on his head too doing a suplex. So the man clearly can't suplex, so why is he still doing it? I guess he's just trying to power these suplexes, but his form is awful. You could tell he wasn't a real wrestler at any point, because if he was, he must have sucked. I don't know anything about his background, but I think he's way too green to be in the ring to be doing some of these moves that he's doing. He is definitely someone that needs to go back to Orlando and train. Not even be on NXT. Just train for another year, because he sucks. So it is sad that Big E broke his neck like this. He's a bit in good spirits, though. I don't know how long he'll be out. I don't know how serious of a broken neck this is. There's been some past broken necks. That's why Austin's career eventually came to an end in the first place. So it's kind of ironic that here they are hyping up Stone Cold's return when his neck issues are what got the best of him eventually in his career. And now, sadly, here goes Big E with a broken neck. Hopefully, he'll have a good recovery. Come back to the ring. Once again, WWE's bad booking for their black wrestlers comes back because now Lashley's hurt, Big E's hurt. So there's kind of a lot riding on Bianca Belair at WrestleMania now. Or do the black fans once again get slapped in the face from this company? And also, another reason why I'm even doing this in the first place, this podcast, being a diagnosis, is because this is how these companies blend together. AEW and WWE and all the smaller companies all blend together. WWE fans like to call AEW fans marks and that they're a cult. And there's some truths in that. There are definitely some truth in that when you look at Dave Meltzer and all the ass-kissing he does for Tony Khan, because it's bought ass-kissing from the billionaire son. So there's definitely some cult-like behavior with AEW fans. I won't disagree with that. But we can't act like WWE fans don't. There's WWE marks 100% who just still think WWE is so superior to AEW because they've just been around forever and they have these superstars that are household names. Granted, that is true. But the writing for WrestleMania so far is garbage. And AEW's booking, as much as I shit on Tony Khan, has been a lot stronger over these past 2 months that I've been watching wrestling again. But also, there is a Twitter account dedicated to AEW botches. And that is it's an account that needs to be there, honestly, because there's a lot of sloppy work in AEW. This is true. But then you have WWE cutting most of their roster. But you got guys like Ridge Holland doing one of the worst botches here to Big E over the past couple of years that I've seen. So WWE has green workers of their own and have botches of their own, and it's a big problem in the entire business of pro wrestling. There's a lot of sloppy work because wrestlers try to do too much in the ring to try and get pops from the audience that they can't even get half the time anymore, or to try and get 5-star ratings from a bunch of people whose opinions don't matter, instead of having characters and storylines to get them over far easier. So yeah, it all blends together in all of pro wrestling between all of these companies. And that is why I try to do this diagnosis, just to say that storylines and character work matter way more in getting over than matches and sloppy work just for high spots. Alright, let's get to some of my best of the week. We're going to start with matches this week. We have to go to Revolution for the best matches, even though none of the matches blew me away. The best match for me at Revolution, I talked about it earlier, was Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley. I just liked the way that match built up. It wasn't just all violence, and it wasn't all, kind of all over the place. Like some of the matches of the pay-per-view were. So that was my top match, but I even think Jericho and Kingston was a great match of the pay-per-view. That's right up there with Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley for me, because Jericho and Kingston told the best story of the night, in my opinion, and the non-handshake after the match led to something on Dynamite that was actually meaningful and was a storyline. So props to that match as well. I mean, as far as dog collar matches go, the CM Punk MJF dog collar match was good. Not exactly my cup of tea. I mean, dog collar matches in general aren't like spectacular, but that was a good match in its own right. So those were the three best matches of the pay-per-view for me. As far as WWE goes, I guess the only match worth watching, even though it too was a little too long for me, was the tag title match between Rollins and Owens and RK Bro and Alpha Academy. Just for that RKO alone, of all the extreme moves done on the pay-per-view, that RKO looked the best out of anything because it was so smooth. So if you're going to do a high spot, make it look as smooth as that RKO from Randy Orton. Promo of the week, I'd probably have to give it to Eddie Kingston and Jericho on Dynamite. They were both great on the mic. There was What Chance, and Eddie Kingston put an end to those pretty nicely, getting the attention back on him and Jericho and not the marks in the audience. And I'm still going to give credit to the Miz's mic work. The segment on Raw went on too long, but Miz on the mic just always gets it done, and it's always entertaining. The segment of the week is extremely difficult, honestly. There was no segments this past week on any of the TV shows that blew me away, but I guess I just have to give it to Matt Hardy getting voted out of his own faction only for Jeff Hardy to return and the Hardy Boys back together on AEW. I guess to make one last run as a tag team. I've heard rumors that they're just back together to take on dream matches, so we'll see where that leads between Matt and Jeff Hardy. Feud of the week. I mean, it has to be Jericho and his new faction against Eddie Kingston, Santana, and Ortiz. It was a good segment to it. It went on too long for it to be segment of the week for me. But I think the feud's continuing, I would think, because Ortiz and Santana got attacked by Hager and Jericho, their old teammates on that faction. So I guess that's the feud of the week for me. I don't even think I did a tag team of the week last week because tag team wrestling isn't great right now. I mean, I would have to give the tag team of the week to RK Bro, the new WWE tag titles on Raw, the tag champs. Oh, another segment I forgot. So we're gonna go back to segment of the week is just William Regal returning at the end of that match between Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley. I have to give some credit for that, tying William Regal to those two, since they do have a history of being trained by Regal and being, Regal being a mentor and him like bringing them together as a tag team. It fits, it works, so some credit to that. The woman wrestler of the week. Bianca Belair was barely on because Becky got injured. So I can't even give it to her this week. And the rest is slim pickings. Both companies have completely dropped the ball on women's wrestling so far this year. In 2022, the ball has been completely dropped. I'm just going to have to give it to Jade Cargill, The match wasn't great at the pay-per-view, but it was better than Britt Baker continuing to stink it up as women's champion at AEW. So I will give it to Jade Cargill for continuing to make the TBS title mean something in AEW. And then the male wrestler of the week is honestly also hard because they've kind of put Bryan Danielson in a tag team, which kind of takes momentum off of him as a single superstar that he is. And then everything on WWE basically sucked. So, I mean, I have to give my male wrestler of the week, I'm going to give it to Eddie Kingston. I used to run a blog, and quite a few years ago, this was like 2015, 2016, when Eddie Kingston was in Impact Wrestling, and he was just blowing everyone away on the microphone in WWE or anywhere. So I've always loved his mic work. But I'm glad they gave him a story of, can Eddie Kingston win the big one? Because I think Kingston deserves an honest, good push on a big company. Because he's entertaining, and I think he understands how to just work on the mic and work in storylines. So I'm giving the male wrestler of the week to Eddie Kingston. He had the complete story in a match at the pay-per-view and the best story going into Impact. So props to Eddie Kingston. And Jericho deserves some credit on that as well. He played a part in the story and turning back heel on Dynamite. All right, that's all I got this week for wrestling. We are limping to WrestleMania. I would love for WWE to give us more going to WrestleMania, but they're not going to give it. It's going to be more of the same these next few weeks until we just get to WrestleMania. As for AEW, it is the better product right now. It just is. I'm not in the AEW cult. I will call Tony Khan out on all of his bullshit. But if we're just being honest, and I'm definitely unbiased, trust me, because I will talk a lot of shit about AEW. But right now, they are just putting together the more competent stories and matches. And WWE is just doing what they have done for a decade now and just doing the bare minimum.